Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dedicated Show. My name is Kate Strachnyi. I'm founder of Dedicated, and I'll be your host for today's show. This is actually the 12th episode of the year with a goal to get to 100 by the end of 2024. And the topics are really interesting. They keep changing, they keep on coming. We've got great volunteers and a great lineup. So, for today, we are talking about autonomous transformation and reason driven decision making. So, we've got a special guest. His name is Brian Evergreen. He's an author and CEO at the Profitable Good Company. He wrote a book called Autonomous Transformation Creating a More Human Future in the Era of Artificial Intelligence. Now, he was kind enough to let me know that we can give away 2 of those books. So I'm actually going to put up the hashtag that you can use to go ahead and enter that raffle. If you haven't joined a Dedicated show before, I'll let you know how this goes. You type in hashtag reason driven. That's the hashtag that we chose for this episode. Type that into the comments on either LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, or Brian's LinkedIn or Twitter, and you will be entered into a raffle to win a book. We'll draw a raffle about halfway through the session, and we'll do it again towards the end of the session, so you will still have a chance to win. All right. I'll remove that from the stage, and I will actually bring Brian up on our virtual stage here. Brian, welcome to the Dedicated Show.
Thank you very much for having me, Kate. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited to finally chat. I know we met a couple of years ago, probably 3 years ago, if not more. And now we finally get to actually communicate and have a conversation about your new book, which huge congratulations, by the way. I know it's no small effort to get a book out there.
Thank you very much. It's an interesting, it's a journey, right? And you know better than I, you've written at least, I think 4, right?
Yeah. I count one of them more than others because that's my O'Reilly book. That's like my publisher book. It feels more real to me than the self-published, but you're right. This was the 4th book in my library.
Congratulations to you as well.
Thank you. So, Brian, before we actually get into the topic, I want you to tell the audience a bit about yourself and also talk about what your typical day in the life of Brian looks like.
Ooh, that's a good question. And that's shifted a lot over the last year. So I'm Brian Evergreen. And for those who don't know me, I used to be an internationally competitive chess player. And then I studied music theory and composition in school, which I always joke is the most linear path you can take into AI. And then I worked in a number of corporations that some of which you may have heard of, Accenture, a little company called Microsoft as well. There I led AI strategy for Microsoft US, and then later worked for Microsoft Research, where I led autonomous co-innovation for autonomous AI. And in those different roles that I'd had at Microsoft, working with Fortune 500 C-level executives on their AI, setting their AI 2030 agendas and working backwards, I started to feel like digital transformation was only part, like going from analog to digital wasn't the end of the story. It was really the opening of the chess game, so to speak, not the end game. And so that's why I started to look into and research what would that next era of transformation beyond digital transformation be. And so what I ended up codifying was autonomous transformation, which is the title of the book that Kate mentioned. And in terms of day in the life, for a while there, it was working at Microsoft while researching and writing the book. I left Microsoft last April. So now day in the life is either, writing an article for a publication. Most of my time at this point is advising clients. But I also do quite a bit of keynoting and speaking and trying to, spark innovation and change within either organizations or at events. And so that's the kind of, hopefully that answered both pieces of your question.
Absolutely, yes. And I'm very familiar with that tiny organization called Microsoft. So great. Yes. I think most people heard of it. By the way, you've been doing a great job at being on every show or writing every article and podcast you can, because I Googled you before the show and I'm like, wow, he's done a lot in the past couple of months. Just, I know the book is a good reason to sort of come out there and keep talking about it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Well, and frankly, I feel like the book, it's interesting because I think for some people, the book becomes something where they're retelling the same things from the book over and over again. And there's a way that I think that for me, it's it's been fun to build on, and based on the feedback I'm getting from people of what's resonating or not, to say, oh, I realized that maybe I made that point in this way in the book, but I need to distill that further to be something that, is at a quick glance in an article you can immediately grasp and, and go apply. So it's been fun to continue building on that work, and those articles, interviews have all given me an opportunity to keep refining, which I've really enjoyed.
And I could tell that you enjoy it. You look like you're actually having fun, which is great. Like, we don't want miserable people out there.
I have
Okay,
a cup
here
of
goes
coffee in
another
my
one.
hand, so.
What did you have? What do you have? Coffee? I have coffee.
So tell me about your book, Kate.
I was going upstairs. Both my mom and my husband are like, "So what about your book?" I'm like, "Okay, we've done this before," because they saw me with ask me about my book mug. It
Nice.
is great at starting conversations. My sister-in-law got this for me, I think, after my very first self-published book, and I had it hidden in the basement. Then we moved again. I put it in the basement, and I just found it. I'm like, "Ooh, I actually talk a lot more about my new book now, so I can start using the mug again." But Brian, in your book, you talk about autonomous transformation. And I think a term most people are more familiar with is digital transformation. So I think it'll be great for you to maybe define both and talk about the nuances, the differences.
Awesome. So digital transformation was codified in 2011. We've been on this journey from analog to digital, and but that's not where it ends. Once you make something digital, so to speak, what's next? What's after that? And so the next goalpost that I believe is there, and that research has shown is autonomous or autonomy. And so if you have a system that maybe you have a process that used to be completely manual and analog, now it's digital. So now people are able to do more with the same number of resources because they've made the process digital. And the next goalpost being that if we make that process completely autonomous, then our people can then do more other things that maybe they weren't even able to do at all before, or the more resource intensive things that are not yet able to be made autonomous. And so in terms of defining them, what I did is I went and I started with, because I realized that digital transformation is it's like an amoeba that's taking over and growing, so that even if you just are plugging a printer into the wall, practically it feels like people will call that digital transformation because it's a machine. And so I went back to the roots of the words, right? So I thought about, well, what are all the different types of initiatives that people are embarking on where they're not transforming anything? Yes, it's going from analog to digital, but nothing's really, the process is the same. It's just digital now. So it's more efficient, it's better, but it's not transformed. And so I started with the definition and worked backwards. And the word that best describes that is actually reformation. And so in the book, I have a little 2x2 where you have digital reformation is when when you're going from analog to digital, but basically it's the same process, or it's the same, flow, the same value being created. Digital transformation being analog to digital, but you're fundamentally transforming, the paradigm on which you're creating value. And so examples from those two would be Expedia would be an amazing example of digital reformation, because it used to be a highly manual, go in person or call your travel agent process.
Oh
And
God, I
now
don't
you
miss
can
that, Brian.
exactly. And now you can just do it on you can book your hotel in the Uber on the way to the airport, or on the
Yeah.
way to the airport, or even to a hotel, just on your phone. And so it's so much more efficient, but the underlying process is essentially the same. Um, Digital transformation being more like what we're seeing in the gig economy with Uber, right? Where it's transformed the way even that we think about what it means to work and how we show up. And then autonomous reformation would be when you have the same process creating the same value, but it's now autonomous, so it's more efficient. And that's best example of that I found is warehousing. And for Amazon, they're the biggest buyer of robotics in the U.S. And that would be a great example of autonomous reformation, because it's significantly more efficient than it was before, but it's not transformed. And then the last would be autonomous transformation, which is when you're moving from digital or analog to an autonomous paradigm on a given process, and or just value creation. And the best example now that we actually used to give a different example because Rabbit R1 hadn't come to the fore yet. So I think Rabbit R1 is now the best consumer facing example that I've seen, where it's decoupling agency from where you can actually just speak, say, I want I want the thing I always get from my favorite Thai place to Uber Eats, and it'll go through the entire flow because it already has all the information it needs. So that's a good example where the type of life that we live, the way that we can navigate the world, is beginning to be transformed by a new paradigm, a new capability that they had tried, they hadn't quite cracked it. I feel like this is the first time we're starting to see sparks of autonomous transformation.
So thanks for breaking that down, Brian. If paint me a picture, what does it look like when most industries have moved towards autonomous transformation? Like they're there. What are we doing with our
So
lives?
great question. So the thing, and then this gets to the tagline of my book, creating a more human future in the era of artificial intelligence. And so most organizations today, if you think about the work that we do as like a pyramid, a hierarchy of, at the top is sort of mirrors Maslow's hierarchy a little bit. As a top is sort of creativity, like using the best functions and resources that we have as people. And at the bottom, let's say in this case would be like the most transactional, repetitive, dull, dirty, dangerous type of work. And so I think over time, the promise of bringing more and more machines into the workplace and into different environments has been that the dull, dirty, and dangerous things can be passed off to machines, which means that we as people can be safer and and have the psychological and emotional and even physical safety to use our creative capacities. One thing I always say is, if you think about a band like U2, let's say, and you said, okay, U2 is going to write their next album while they're on tour instead of waiting till they're off tour. Would you, the question I pose sometimes is, would you expect that album to be as good as all the albums they've written while they're not on tour?
I don't know, because it's such a subjective question.
Fair. I mean, it's U2, right? Of course, it's going to be good.
I think
What
it's
I'd
going to
say
be
is
good. I
maybe
mean,
the
maybe they're not as
inverse of that is,
focused. Like
if
it's
you could choose between them writing an album while on tour, and it doesn't have to be U2, just whatever your favorite band is,
right.
or okay, they're home, they're done being on tour. Now they have the emotional and creative energy to write, I would argue a much better album than if they're playing out, playing at sold out stadiums every night and then trying to be creative.
Right. They're more exhausted. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And most people today in organizations are so their schedules are filled with meetings and with tasks and with transactional things that they need to do. And
Right.
I liken that to being on tour, where you're spending all of your emotional and creative energy. And then we don't have time really for innovation. Or even if we have carved out a 2-hour, meeting to go whiteboard, it's like we're not in the emotional and mental headspace to really do our best thinking. And so to me, as organizations move toward autonomous transformation, the promise about the future of work is that we will move up the hierarchy and actually have more space and time to do our best thinking and to decouple from just the operational, keeping the engine moving, so to speak, to be able to envision a real future and work to create that future.
Right. Do you think that we need some of that on tour experience maybe for inspirational purposes? Like I can imagine when they're on tour, they sort of get the vibe from the energy and maybe get inspired for their next song or album.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I don't think that we would want to be at a point where people are just so decoupled from work. I don't know
Just
how
sitting
they
at
would ever
home.
even come up with good ideas on, I don't think we're going to be in a futuristic, everyone's in a Wall-E, kind of state, but coming up with great ideas while they're being, floated around. No, I think much more that, it would that basically, if right now we're at 99.9% operational responsibilities, as we
Yeah.
start to inch that number down, if we get to the point where maybe even 80% of our time is operational and 20% is now autonomously, being handled. I also think that, as people, we spend so much time looking at screens, because
Yes.
that's the paradigm by which we create value. But I'm excited by the possibility that we actually can start to move further away from that as we have agents that can autonomously handle things for us. And I think that the paradigm for organizations will begin to shift somewhat away from emotional appeal to more getting down to just focusing on the price to value equation. Because if I've asked an autonomous agent to go buy me a given thing, let's say it's, I need, baby wipes, let's say, right?
Right.
It's going to look at price to value. It's going to, how much it costs, what quality and how fast can it get here? And it doesn't matter about the Huggies commercial that was on the TV the other day.
Yeah, that's
The
true.
agent doesn't
Or
have
the
that.
sponsored ad when you Google something. Yeah.
Right. So if anything, if there's micro negotiations taking place between my agent and an agent that represents various organizations or retailers, then there might be a hyper personalized, like based on the values that my agent sort of sends over, of like, this is what, the types of value that this person holds. There might be okay, there's this one micro bit of marketing that's passed through that's then shown to me on either my screen or my phone, or just maybe it's audio, but that lands for me, instead of I'm scrolling through a huge website to try to find the type of shirt that I want to get from Ralph Lauren. Instead, it's okay based on the the cut and all these other things that we already know about. They already know all of that, right? Being able to say,
Of course.
this shirt seems like, if you're looking for this color, this shirt seems great. And then I can say, I'd actually like a darker shade of green. And then it can say, okay, this shirt. And then yes. And now that transaction's complete without, that same experience of scrolling through something. And so if you kind of scale that to your experiences as a person across working with organizations and brands around the world, to me, it's pretty exciting to think about, doubling down on the price to value equation.
It is extremely exciting, but I don't think we're going to move away from screens. I mean, I've been seeing the Apple Vision Pro stuff. I'm not interested in that at all, but now we're like taping a screen to our eyes. So it's kind of crazy.
I agree. I mean, I think that to me, I think it's going to be coming down to do we let the tools around us shape us and what it means to be human, and even our rituals? Because I think in a lot of ways, the smartphone has become a Trojan horse, where a lot of us, the natural tendency is so addictive, right? The natural tendency is to be looking at your phone out, when at all hours. And so I think we have to make decisive choices as people. I agree that we're not going to get to a point of full screenlessness anytime soon. But I do think that one thing we have to consider as people is, what are those rituals, so to speak, that make us feel most human, whether it's sitting down for dinner with all of our phones away and just looking at each other. And even if we have a question where we think, I'm not sure about, who won that game, or what's the name of that artist that I can't quite remember, not like avoiding the temptation to look it up and just say, yeah, like we used to in the 90s, like, yeah, I guess I don't know, and just move on, right? Let's just have the conversation. We don't need to look it up right now, right? And so I think that we'll be, I agree with you about the Vision Pro and the Quest.
Right.
Like personally, those aren't things I want to, rituals that I want to enter into right now as a person, because I feel like there's already so much to pull us away from the people around us. So yeah.
Even my kids now, if I don't immediately know something, they're just like, search it up, and I'm like, you search it up. You have your own. They have iPads, so they have laptops. They can search now, which is good and bad, I guess, in some cases. But I noticed we have a question from Greg here. Let me take that one. So he says, I've been arguing that this new AI digital evolution removes the layers between us and our data. I see a world without programmers, without apps, so without applications, spreadsheets, word processing, etc., or even keyboards. Only our personal intelligence. So Greg wants to know if he's daft. What do you think?
Well, I've seen a few different comments from Greg, and I can tell you that you're not daft, Greg. But I will say that I don't know that I share the same vision at this, in terms of a world without programmers or apps or applications. On the one hand, I think I do love the idea of getting to the point where, we have self-generation of electricity, like we're more self-reliant as families or peoples or individual units, and our ability to like do farming, like micro farming and things like that, could get us to the point where we wouldn't have the same need to be connected to screens and even to work the same way that we are now. That's interesting to me about what it would take for us if we wanted to create that future. But in terms of world without programmers, I think that there's, I think that there's sometimes I've seen people make the case that generative AI, because it can create code now, sort of what I call the slippery slope fallacy, which is, or well, not I call, that is a slippery slope fallacy. I just happen to label that one as that, which is, one step in any direction naturally means that all the other steps in that direction are going to happen. And so we're projecting out, it's for sure going to fall that way. And so the fact that, and generative AI can write sometimes passable code, or even sometimes good, good, clean, elegant code.
Well, it's
Um,
getting better every day,
it's
right?
getting better,
A
yeah.
little
And
bit.
so, but I would say, to me, I look at that a little bit as the idea of, the fact that generative AI can write poetry, let's say, doesn't mean that, like if you could choose between your romantic partner writing you a poem from scratch
Right.
versus generative AI, sure, generative AI can, but it means more. And I think from a programming perspective, I think that when you think about user experience, generative AI has no, and I don't believe it will anytime soon, because it doesn't have authority and understanding. It just has language, right?
Yeah.
And so if you I still think that programmers are still going to be the artists, and maybe they'll be able to do more faster thanks to these tools and all the capabilities they're developing.
Yeah.
But I think we're definitely still going to be needing programmers for a long time.
I agree. And I think the role might change, right? You might
Mhm.
have some more support and sort of code checking and maybe cleaning and
Yep.
documentation
Right.
of your
You'll
code.
have more documentation for sure, more
Yeah.
like better test, the promise of driven development
Yeah.
actually realized would be great, right?
Yeah, you'll have no excuse for some of those things anymore because it's just going
Exactly.
to be happening on its own.
Mhm.
So Greg says thank you. He appreciates not being daft, not being called out here. So Brian, I do want to talk about your book a bit. So were you still at Microsoft, that tiny company, when you got the idea for the book, or what was your life like when you had this idea to write a book?
Yep, I was at Microsoft, and so I was presenting. I'd actually created an autonomous transformation program at Microsoft that I was leading with various clients around the world. And so for me, I was already kind of on that journey of talking about that and trying to etch out and define. But I didn't, it's different when you're running back to that same example of your operational responsibilities. I knew the space. I knew the kind of the blurry box of what autonomous transformation could be, but so much of the work that I was doing was about forming partnerships around leveraging autonomous AI to help organizations to take some of the things that in most cases organizations weren't able, like they that their people didn't even have bandwidth for, and leveraging AI to be able to do those things autonomously. So I'll give you an example of, like, if you take like a manufacturing environment where there's signals and alerts taking place on machines all the time. And there might be hundreds or even thousands in a given day. And a lot of them just need to be dismissed by the operator. And the operator knows just by looking at it, oh, yeah, that's not something I need to worry about. Or, oh, yeah, that's something I need to pay attention to. And so being able to work with them to be able to say, what if we learned that pattern based off of the, not starting with what data do we have, but starting with what expertise do we have, and how do you as an expert recognize when is dismissible versus something that needs to be paid attention to. And then can we translate that to machine language, leveraging reinforcement learning and the rule set combined with simulations, representing these machines in this environment, to be able to automatically dismiss and only keep the relevant ones, so that now that operator, they're still employed, they still have this, there's still all the same amount of operational responsibilities, but now that there's a load off of all these alerts happening all the time, they need to dismiss, and they're just getting the few that are important. And
Right.
so there are projects and things, I was either collaborating with folks at Microsoft, seeing research breakthroughs take place within Microsoft, because I was in Microsoft research, that for me continue to kind of make the blurry image a little more clear. Oh, this part's a little more clear in this part. But it wasn't until actually Wiley, I signed the book deal, that I thought, okay, now I sort of have to go out and research and really define what this is and isn't, and how it's different than digital transformation. So that's kind of how the beginning of the journey started.
Right. Once you've got a publisher contract in place, you kind of have no choice, right? They
Right.
set
Yeah.
deadlines. We need chapter one by this date, and you're like, okay, well, here we go. We have no choice.
Exactly. Exactly.
So you mentioned that it was a journey. What was your favorite part? And don't say it's the very end when you hit publish. What was your favorite part of that book writing process?
Well, two things. One was interviewing. It was
Okay.
maybe it makes sense given the title of the book, or the tagline being "More Human Future." I ended up interviewing around 50 people from across,
Wow.
public sector, private sector, academia, research institutes. And so those interviews yielded so much, so many insights that I drew from.
Mhm.
Um, and so, and then I think the second half of it was when I, to that point about getting out of your operational responsibilities, I went to Norway for 10 days. And
Wow, really? For this? For the book? For the
for the
research?
book, for the book, like no other reason. I went and up to the Arctic Circle in a what had been a fisherman's cabin that was converted into a very, Nordic, modern, beautiful, cabin. And it was in the fjords up in the Lofoten Islands, and basically hid there. There was one local coffee shop that was open till 3 every day except Sunday, and that was my one chance to just be around other humans. And so I did that almost every day. But then the rest of the time it was, staying in that cabin and writing, and the view was absolutely incredible. I was looking out at a fjord and with the water. But I had no excuse at that point. I didn't have children around. I wasn't showing up at work. I wasn't taking any work calls. It was just focusing on writing. And I think, creating that space made the biggest difference for being able to actually push new ideas forward and flesh out like what would actually have to be a part of that in order for it to be something people could grab onto and make useful, as opposed to just being theoretical.
It's so interesting because I actually ended up doing something not I can't even say similar. I didn't go to Norway, but I was co-authoring a book with Kristen Kerr. She co-authored the Mothers of Data Science book, and
Mhm.
we were both so close to with our sections that but we needed to get together. So we booked the Ritz-Carlton sort of halfway point between my house and her house. We left the kids. Both of us have two kids, and we got together to write the book, and we were so productive because we had no choice. We were there for one reason, and we got so much done in just like 6 to 8 hours that we sat there and focused. Then we went to a steakhouse and had a great meal, so it was fun as well.
Awesome.
But
Yeah.
definitely helps when you sort of change your location and
Mhm.
sometimes even pay for a
Right.
venue where you can use. And I think was it the lady who wrote the Harry Potter books? I think she had a similar story where
Mm.
he ended up booking some extremely expensive hotel for
I
weeks
haven't
or
heard that one.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, look into it and to really get the book done because then she had no choice but to write. So
Yeah,
interesting.
it's interesting how the environment can make such a big difference. I don't think we pay a lot of attention to that in our work. And so I usually encourage leaders when they're trying to do their long range planning and think further out. I mean, you don't have to go all the way to Norway, but whatever that version for you of like getting out of the operational grind where people are going to come in and interrupt you with another quick decision you have to make.
Yeah.
If you can find a way to carve that out, like that's the best way to do future facing work.
Yeah, I think it was Thomas Edison or one of those inventors. He also had like a cabin in the woods that he would go to
Mm,
for like a week or so
it
of
doesn't
the
surprise
year and just sit and plan. Raghav was saying, I wonder what the alone time does to us with those breaks. It often happens those times in
me.
solitary with nature helps. I agree. It helps me. It's hard to sometimes separate yourself from the technology and the family, right? Because
Right.
both those things take up most of your mind. That's
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting to dip in and out where you're thinking about something at the workday, and then you're with your family, and then you're the next morning you're thinking about it again, or if you don't haven't built aren't a part of a family unit, maybe just being with friends or going about your day, and it's interesting how like the context that we're in shifts the way that we think about things. I
yeah.
know that becoming a father like really changed the way that I think about um, life even right, like, and what it means to be here, and like right versus just being me right as a person. And so it's interesting like how much the context shift can change the way that we like a filter, like completely change the way we see everything.
Did you become a father before or after the book came out?
But before, I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old.
Oh, okay. So same age difference as my kids. Yeah, that's the best. I hope they're little best friends now.
Oh, they're just cresting the best friend ridge for sure.
Okay, good. Very nice. So back to autonomous transformation, right? How many
Mhm.
organizations would you say, and there are so many organizations out there in the world that are maybe close to that autonomous transformation phase?
It's a great question. I would say it's the majority of organizations today that I have had visibility to are and also from, conversations I've had from a research perspective, are putting a lot of heavy investment into what I mentioned earlier, digital reformation, of moving things from analog to digital, and significantly improving efficiencies, but not necessarily transforming a given process or the value that they're creating. They want to keep doing the same thing more efficiently, in a lot of cases. And so I'd say that's probably, if I had to put a percentage on it, maybe 70% of what I've seen and heard about. Of course, it's all called digital transformation because we've been using that for anything that involves, digital technologies. But I would say, if we were going to be a little bit more precise, I would say that digital reformation. And then I'd say maybe 20% digital transformation. And then maybe 10% of organizations are really thinking about and focusing on, what would that mean and what would have to be true for us to actually have, autonomy in this process. And I'd say the ones that I've seen that are focusing on that are, more than others, are either the highly digital, like financial institutions that, that there's no, it's all digital in the first place, so making it autonomous isn't a big leap. Or interestingly, the sort of heavy industries where, they see this physical safety sort of, like, one example would be Dow Chemical, where they had people, they used to, when they have these giant vats filled with chemicals, they used to have people don hazmat suits, and then they'd have to stop production, drain the vats, and they'd go in and inspect it. And it was risky for the people, and it slowed down production. So there's a cost involved. And now they just drop drones into the vats, and the drones can scan
So
them
much better.
autonomously. Right. And so people, and no one lost their job because of that. They just, one less thing they have to do on a regular basis. They're safer, and they don't have to stop production. So it's actually more profitable and safer for the people, and it just hits every box, right? So I'd say that in the heavy industries is where, because of the fact that you couldn't rely on the cloud for digital transformation with latencies when you're in a production environment, I feel like it's been pretty interesting to see now that the technologies are getting to the point. There's some organizations that are going from analog straight to autonomous because they couldn't afford to go to the cloud for an operational process, even 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. But now the technology has gotten to the point where you can actually have an autonomous agent that can be, exported as a Java applet that's a flattened neural net. It's super lightweight and can be deployed directly to a control system. They get to kind of skip the digital transformation part and go straight to autonomous.
Very interesting. I mean, I have two questions left for you. So one of my questions is, what are you personally going to do when AI just does everything for you, right? Let's start with that one. You have no job, Brian. What do you do every day?
So great question. So I'll answer the philosophical question, but I first want to counter the premise, which is AI doing everything. I think the idea that AI is going to take all of our jobs. One, AI has never taken anyone's job, because AI doesn't show up at people's work and knock on the door and ask for someone's job. It's leaders saying, I want to cut costs by applying technology in this way. So I feel like that's always the question I say to people is like, well, look at your leadership, because if there are people that want to augment and do more with the same number of people, they're going to use these technologies for good within your organization. And if they're the kind of people that are going to cut costs and cut people to do that, then they're going to do that regardless of how good the technologies are. They're going to always be looking for opportunities to do that. So it's more of a question of leadership. And then in terms of the idea of all jobs going away and like UBI and things like that, not to speak to the political aspect, but just from a purely technical perspective, I'd say that I think it's a long way off, even just technology wise. But two, I'd say that we as a human species are not at the point. I don't think we're done. The idea of translating everything that we're currently doing, even if we could currently translate everything we're already doing over to machines to be done, in my mind, there's so much, like, we still have to cure cancer. Like there's so much more value to be created in the future for us, that I would say that as we offload things, it just means we get to move forward into more exploration, as opposed to just not working anymore. But to answer the philosophical aspect of your question, if I didn't have to work at all, I think that probably the thing I'd spend a lot of my time on would be with my family, and then exploring different cultures. Like I'd go to Italy and learn how to make pasta, in Tuscany, and then I'd go to, Japan, and I'd travel the world with my family, and have as many immersive connections with people all over the world. It would be if I didn't have to work at all, and if I had the luxury of, doing whatever, that's probably what I would choose.
You could probably put on those Apple Vision Pro goggles and be in Italy with a nana somewhere who's
That
teaching
doesn't
you how
count. No, no,
doesn't sound appealing, right? I feel like we're
no.
not going to get there. It's just, I'm not seeing it either. Yeah, I mean, I personally go hiking more, play guitar more, definitely spend more time with my kids and just have fun. I think people are getting so worried, like, oh no, AI is going to take my job. I'm not that worried. There are lots of things I use AI
Yeah,
and automation for, like even setting up this show with you, right? We use Google Form
right,
to capture the topic you want to talk about. We use Calendly to book it. Otherwise, we would have been you and I, hey, when are you free? Oh, I'm free on this day, but not at this time. But hey,
right.
can we move that? Like, I'm totally open to all of those automations and benefits. For
I completely agree. I think that I think there's a long tail or long range ahead of us of assistive and augmentative
yeah,
applications of technology more than anything.
absolutely. All right. So last question is, where can folks go to get a copy of your book? Can we see a copy of your book? Do you have one
Oh,
nearby? I
yeah,
think I saw one behind
it's right
you.
here. It's right here. Don't worry. Autonomous
Oh, there we
transformation.
go. Very
Uh,
pretty. Did you take that picture yourself or?
I didn't, but I did end up choosing. It's fjords in Norway. So I actually
Okay.
there was like an emotional reason for why I wanted it to be that with the publisher, and so I think I made them go back and forth way more than they would have wanted, but they were very gracious. And they ended up. I said I'm thinking a picture more like this, and then they just used the one that I sent them, which is
Oh,
this one.
perfect. Yeah, it's great when your
They're like more
publisher
like
can
that.
get.
Okay, we'll do that one.
Yeah, I love when the publishers can get on board with getting more of your input because they do have final say, right, on the cover, on the title. I
Yeah.
remember going back and forth with on the title, and they finally agreed to use color-wise, which I was so excited about. So let me just take a couple of comments. So Bonnie loves your cover. Thank you, Bonnie. And Greg says he doesn't unilaterally recommend books or bourbon, but there's something for everyone. But Brian's book is worth to read, maybe even two reads. So
Thank you, Greg, and thank you,
you
Bonnie.
can read that last part. I love it. Awesome. That's
And we didn't get to reason driven. I know that was like the hashtag and part of it.
yes.
So chapter 15, for anybody that's interested, chapter 15 is where it gets into reason driven. We as organizations need to move from being data driven to reason driven, because data driven has become unscientific, and I wish we could unpack that more together, but I'll just leave it at that for now.
Well, no. Fine. The last question. So we all talk about being data driven, data
Yep.
informed, data. Tell us, why should we be reason driven and not data driven? You've got the stage. Go.
Okay, so data driven is has become unscientific. I think we think that we've fallen prey to the illusion that the fact that there's data involved automatically means it's scientific. But the scientific method, just as a reminder, because I know we all know it, is we begin with asking questions, and then we form hypotheses, and then we conduct experiments, then we analyze the results, and then we draw a conclusion, right? But within most organizations today, the way that we go about decision making, especially investing in a given project or initiative, is we begin with questions, we form hypotheses, we then gather data from other things we've already done, and from, in other words, experiments already conducted in the past, or from things we're reading in Gartner, IDC, and we use those to justify the investment decision, which is our conclusion from the, using the same words from the scientific method. So it goes hypotheses, analyzing results of other things we've already done, drawing the conclusion, which is the investment decision. Then we begin the experiment, but instead of calling it an experiment, we call it, we treat it like, okay, we've already proven in advance how long this is going to take, how much this is going to cost, and we're going to tie people's performance to it. So it's become extremely unscientific. If we applied the way we do decision making in organizations to actual science, like cancer research, it wouldn't get funded, because we can't prove in advance how long it's going to take or what the ROI is going to be. We just know that we need to go do it. And the same can be true for organizations. Reason driven is an evolution beyond. So if you think of the trajectory of being gut driven decision making, data driven decision making, the next phase is reason driven decision making, which we still account for all the data. But when we're especially in innovation spaces where there isn't data to say, whether or not that thing is going to work, how long it's going to take, or how much value it's going to create. But our reason, our logic as people tells us that that's something worth exploring and investing in. Being able to actually account for our human discipline of reason and track it as rigorously as we track the data, and marry the two together to be able to re-embrace science in our decision making.
I love that, because I think we've been pushing data driven so much and trying to get, at least let's say, executives at a company to move away from their gut feels and gut reactions, where
Right.
they have that experience. Yes, the data might say this, but they have, let's say, 25 years in the field. They might
Right.
just know a bit more than what the data is telling you, right?
Well, the data told us to go buy NFTs. That's what the data said.
Oh,
Right?
Gary Vee told us to go buy NFTs.
Well, but the data set, like a data-driven decision at that time would have been to buy a $1 million NFT. But anyone who
Did
thought,
you not get $1 million NFT, Brian? I mean, I gotta
anyone who at that time thought, and I didn't buy a single NFT, but anyone who at that time thought, okay, I get that there's some kind of data that seems like that's where things are headed, but
Yep.
I'm just not seeing it. I'm not willing to invest in it. I would
Yeah.
say you've already made a reason-driven decision if you chose not to invest in NFTs. So
I love that. All right, we're going to end on that note. Brian, I want to thank you so much for being on the Dedicated Show. And guys, if you haven't picked up the book, go to, I'm assuming Amazon, because that's where I get my books,
It's on
but
Amazon,
Wiley,
yeah.
Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. I saw some of your posts that it was sold out, and I think in one of the Barnes and Nobles already, right? So get your copy.
It was when it first came out. So yeah, but it is on Barnes and Noble, Target, Amazon, all the major retailers. So
if something's sold out, that's usually a good thing. But I'm sure they're restocked and they're good to go now. So go pick up your copies. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining the show. Thank you for being on the Dedicated Show, and we'll see everybody online.
Thanks for having me, Kate.